I guess we should start in the next 5 minutes because we are expecting some more people to join. Is it fine, Nosratullah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
No
great.
problem.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. So I would like to welcome you all to another great edition of Project Principal on Journal meeting. So today we have our very own Nosratullah Mohammadi, who is a master's candidate in computational neuroscience at the IASBS in Iran, and he'll be diving deep into the physics of brain synapses by discussing his research about Instantaneous Modulation of Gamma Rhythm by Synaptic Time Constants. Am I right? All right. So the presence today, so we have 14 people in this meeting on the 14th of Feb. Nice, amazing. So yeah, over to Nosratullah then.
Okay, should I start?
Yes.
Okay, guys, sorry for ruining your Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day. uh, so let me share my screen. Okay, do you have my screen?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Nosratullah Mohammadi. Oh, by the way, thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to talk here today. And I'm going to talk about my master project, which is the effects of the study of effects of synaptic time constants on brain rhythms, especially with a focus on gamma oscillation. And this is a study supervised by Dr. Ali Rezavalizadeh. And the importance of gamma oscillation, you already know that gamma oscillations in many studies, people recorded gamma frequency of gamma oscillations in different behavioral tasks, such as exploratory tasks in the hippocampus, or motor responses in premotor areas, and a lot of other places. So in 2009, there's this beautiful paper revealed that there is an instantaneous modulation of gamma oscillation frequency, which is happening because of the balancing between the excitation and inhibition in the network. So this LFB signal is recorded from CA3 region of the hippocampus of anesthetized rats. And if you have this signal and you take all of the amplitudes of each cycles and the periods of each cycle at the same time, and you plot it in a, I mean, if you take a 2D histogram, you can see that there's a nice correlation between the interevent intervals or periods and amplitudes. In that study, they claim that the balancing between the inhibition and excitation in the network is the cause of this phenomenon. And to explain it in a simple fashion, try to imagine that if more neurons activate at the same time, you get this black line, which has a larger amplitude. And after these activations, it could be spike activity. Those neurons are going to hyperpolarize, and as you know, and the longer the activation, the longer the amplitude of this activation, the longer the time for this hyperpolarized phase. So for larger amplitudes, have larger hyperpolarized for population activity. So we wanted to see if there's any effect of synaptic time constants on this particular phase amplitude coupling, instantaneous amplitude period correlation, right? So to ask this question, we have to first model the neural network. And in this slide, you can see that we can write a set of equations to describe the behavior of spike activity of one neuron, which we call it Hodgkin-Huxley equations. And if this spike travels through the axon and reaches to the synapses that connect to the target neuron, the shape of this spike becomes this alpha curve, which is much smaller than this spike, but it's a bit longer in durations. So in this alpha curve, you have three parameters. You have this the time of rise time, the time of decay time, and there's this peak value for each alpha curve. But we wanted to make it simple. So instead of Hodgkin-Huxley equation, we use the LIF neuron model, which is Likin integrate fire model. And instead of that alpha synapses, we choose the exponential synapses. And in this exponential synapses, we simply ignore the time of rise time, because the time of rise time is very short, so we can simply ignore it. And I should tell that this is an excitatory synapses. So when this spike reaches to the synapses, the target neuron triggered to generate a spike. And of course, you know that not one neuron is enough for triggering the target neuron to spike. So we need more than one neuron. And so this is an excitatory synapses. And if you want to use inhibitory synapses, you have to use a negative value for this exponential curve. And because we wanted to see the effects of time constants, not any other things, we have to like balance between the time and the peak value, so that the integral of this curve, or the area above this curve, which is simply showing the amount of current inserting to the target neuron, is constant all the times, right? So for longer decay time, we have to choose smaller peak value for the exponential synapses. And in terms of network level, we have to create this 20% inhibitory neurons and 80% excitatory neurons connecting to each other with 10% connection rate. And if I want to like explain how this rhythmic activity occur in the neuron population, for example, in this pink manner, the excitation of excitatory neurons trigger the inhibitory population, and once the inhibitory population activates, it stops the network from activity for a period of time. And after that period of time, the network can now also again generate an activity. So if you repeat this process, you get this activity from your network. So in this study, we fixed the excitatory synaptic decay time to only 2.5 milliseconds. And for inhibitory synaptic decay time, in each simulation, we choose from 1.5 millisecond up to 3.5 millisecond, which is a similar range, symmetrical range around this 2.5 millisecond. For excitatory neurons, we choose 1,000 neurons, and for inhibitory neurons, we choose 250 neurons. So these are some typical parameters for network, neural network simulations. And in previous studies, people showed that by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this decrease in the activity, the frequency of gamma oscillation. Just to check, I'm gonna see if I'm still online. Am I still online?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. I just to make sure. So in this plot, which is our spectral density, you can see that our simulation have different frequency activity in one simulation. So you get gamma oscillation, you get beta, alpha, beta oscillation at the same time for your inhibitory excitatory network, right? So if you simulate this network, you kind of get this plot, which is for each dot in this plot represent spike activities or spike of particular neuron at a particular time. So in the y-axis, you get this neuron ID, and in the x-axis, you get this time indexes. So we simulate the network for 10 seconds, which is 10,000 milliseconds. And in this plot, I only showed 1 second of activity. So in terms of neuronal effect, by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time, for both excitatory neurons and inhibitory neurons, you get this decrease in the membrane voltage of the neuronal activity, and which is reasonable because you let the inhibition presence for a longer time. And for a standard deviation, you get this slight increase by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time. So for inter-event intervals, which is the period between each cycle, you get this increase by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time, both in the average value and the standard deviation. So this plot can already show that the frequency of activity is going to decrease because these interevent intervals are going to increase. So they're getting larger, so that your frequency is getting smaller. Speaking of frequency for single neurons, if you choose, for example, excitatory neurons or inhibitory neurons, for example, in this plot, I only choose 20 excitatory neurons and 20 inhibitory neurons. In a smaller inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this high frequency activity at around 75 hertz, which is gamma oscillation. And once you increase your inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this your frequency is going to get under 25 hertz, and it is the same happening for inhibitory neurons. For a spiking activity, if you count the spike rate for example for 1 second for different neurons, you can see that by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time, your spike rate is also going to decrease from fast gamma to slow gamma oscillation. So in terms of population effects, we extracted different spectral regions so that we wanted to see if there's any if there's any kind of frequency couplings or different frequency couplings, cross couplings between the theta, alpha, beta, and gamma oscillations. But I'm going to describe it in few next slides. So after this spectral separation, we wanted to see if there's any amplitude and period correlation in the signals. So by amplitude period correlation, I mean if we know the amplitude of one cycle, can we predict the period of the next cycle or not, right? And there are other variations as well. So we can ask, okay, if I know the period of one cycle, can I know the amplitude of the next cycle? So is it a good indicator for the amplitude for the next cycle or not? And there are other terms such as amplitude autocorrelations and period autocorrelations that we can still study from this signal. So once we done those calculations, we saw that there are two different behaviors, two distinct behaviors in terms of amplitude period correlations, amplitude correlations, and amplitude autocorrelations, as well as period autocorrelations. So, I mean, in a smaller inhibitory synaptic decay time, compared to excitatory synaptic decay time, of course, by increasing your inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this decrease in your amplitude period correlations, right? And in the next regime, which is larger inhibitory synaptic decay time compared to excitatories, by increasing that synaptic time constant, you get this slight increase in your amplitude period correlations. And this scenario happens again for different set of correlations. You can see the correlation coefficients here, which is the slope of these curves, this data, basically. So we wanted to see if so in the 2009 paper by Atalla, he explained that the balance between excitation and inhibition in the network is the main reason for this instantaneous modulation in the network. So we wanted to see if there's any kind of logical reason for that two distinct behavior for inhibitory for amplitude period correlations in the network. That inhibition and excitation can explain it. So by taking the correlation between the excitation and inhibition in the network in different simulations, we saw that there's also two distinct behavior for a smaller inhibitory synaptic decay time compared to excitatories and larger inhibitory synaptic decay time compared to excitatories. So we kind of replicate the results that the balance between inhibition and excitation of the network can explain the amplitude period correlations. But in this study, we show that inhibitory synaptic decay time can be something to focus on. It is important to find this balancing between inhibition and excitation in the network. And as I said before, once we have different frequency bands, we can also find cross-frequency couplings. So in in this simple example, we can see that if you have two signal with two different frequencies, you can couple those two signals into one signal that is, for example, in this signal, this is amplitude modulation, and in this signal, this is amplitude frequency modulation, so that the frequency of one signal can modulate the amplitude of the next signal, or vice versa. One of the famous phenomenon in different cortical regions is phase amplitude coupling, right? So we wanted to see if what we try to play with can affect the phase amplitude coupling as well. So by making a histogram for different phases and repeating counting the repeated time of amplitudes, we kind of see that for theta gamma phase amplitude coupling, in 1.5 millisecond of inhibitory synaptic decay time, there's a phase tendency to phase zero, or there's a phase coupling with a tendency to phase zero. And when you choose inhibitory synaptic decay time equals to excitatory one, you kind of lost this phase amplitude coupling. And when you increase this 1.5 millisecond up to 3.5 millisecond, that phase amplitude coupling tendency goes from zero phase to phase pi. And in this and in a better presentation for alpha gamma phase amplitude coupling, you can see that in a smaller inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this phase tendency to phase zero, and once you increase your inhibitory synaptic decay time, the coupling shifts from phase zero to phase pi. And this is the same in the theta gamma phase amplitude coupling. So that that amount of once you prolong the presence of inhibitory synaptic decay time, or the presence of the activity of your inhibitor neurons, those inhibitor neurons can stop the other neurons, targeted neurons, from coupling phase zero, and it just delays it to the phase pi. And in beta gamma phase amplitude coupling, because in larger inhibitory synaptic decay time, the activity of beta and gamma is getting closer and closer together, you kind of lost this phase amplitude coupling. So in Fourier phase, you can see that for longer inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get this slow gamma and fast beta, which is kind of similar together. So, in summary, in this study, we tried to simulate the network with typical parameters, and for excitatory neurons, and we choose a range, a symmetrical range between 1.5 millisecond to 3.5 millisecond to see if you increase the amount of presence of inhibition in the network, or decrease it, what would happen in that set of correlations for period amplitude correlations. And we saw that there is a strong correlation between the inhibition and excitation in all of the simulation, but as you already seen, we have two distinct behavior. And in terms of neuron impact, we saw that if you increase your inhibitory synaptic decay time, you get a decrease in your frequency activity from fast gamma or from gamma activity from 75 hertz to less than 25 hertz, and in your membrane voltage, by increasing your inhibitory synaptic decay time, the activity of membrane voltage, the mean activity of your membrane voltage is getting decreased. And also, we saw that for interevent intervals, there's this increasing by increasing the inhibitory synaptic decay time. But in terms of population impact, we saw that there are two distinct behaviors in the network for amplitude period correlations, for period amplitude correlations, and for amplitude autocorrelations, as well as the period autocorrelations. And we saw that the inhibition and excitation, or the balance between inhibition and excitation, is a key role for describing this phenomenon. And at the end, we saw that if you increase your inhibitory effects in your network, you kind of let this phase shift happening in your activity for cross-coupling, cross-frequency couplings in phase amplitude for higher, for faster rhythms and slower rhythms. So that was it. This is our group, and this is Dr. Alizadeh, and this is our beautiful university, and I'm here to answer questions.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, that was it.
All right. So amazing presentation, Nosratullah. So any questions, guys? Feel free to
Hi,
ask questions. Yeah.
can I talk?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, sure.
Many thanks for your presentation. I think it's very difficult to do all those modulations. What neurons you are modeling? What type of neurons? That's my first question.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of different types of neurons. So, for example, we have pyramidal neurons, and we have neurons that are in the reward system, for example, and these neurons have different frequencies. So the rhythm is different. Or you are modeling something like, for example, you are modeling a disease, like how this is changing, or what is?
Okay. So in terms of neuron model, as I already said, the neuron model is LIF, which is, I saw that in many papers for excitatory neurons, it's kind of similar to pyramidal neurons, and for inhibitor neurons, it's kind of similar to interneurons, right? What the thing that matters is that we tried to these parameters I used are also using for simulating, for example, population network populations that have a activity at gamma frequency, and like in hippocampus, right?
All right.
So in terms of network parameter, we use both inhibitory neurons as well as excitatory neurons. So, and people call it balanced network.
Right. Oh,
You know,
all right.
I know that many people, I mean, there are different simulations that maybe they're trying to create this rhythmic activity by only using the interneurons, but also there are people that using this combination of inhibitory neurons and excitatory neurons to generate this rhythmic activity.
I understand. I understand you. So you are looking for the synchronicity, but you are not taking a specific model, like a biological model. So you are looking if there are the balancing between those, depending of the
Exactly.
features you named
Yeah.
before. Yes, very, very, very great. Very, very nice. Sorry. Um, what program do you use? What software? Because actually, I work with Berkeley Madonna. So what are you using, or how
So
is you?
yeah. So you know, these models can also code from scratch, but I'm not a fan of writing every single code from scratch. You know, because I believe that we have to uh, trust those packages that they you know they dedicated the developers uh, to increase the reliability. So I use Nest
All
simulator,
right.
right? And all of the codes are written in Python for the statistical analysis and for signal processing. I use every code from scratch. You know, I mean not. Let me show you. Not this part, uh, not this spectral separation part. I used like um, uh, packages, SciPy. I use SciPy for this part, you know,
All right.
and yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that, okay.
Ju I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
No, 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 not at all. Go ahead.
Um, I think so. You are a physicist, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
but in your lab, your modulation and your simulations are going to some kind of corroboration in the experimental field. So there are some part that there are experiments, biological experiments.
Yeah, that is right.
So you use these models are used to uh, in size of the other of experiments too, like what kind of
Yeah,
experiments we need to do.
that is a great question. This is something that was my question as well. And so to answer that question, first, yes, we have to come up with ideas that can replicate in the experimental setups as well. And sometimes uh, it's not quite achievable to try this kind of hypothesis to answer this kind of hypothesis in the experimental studies, because it's hard to like manipulate the into synaptic level, right? But by knowing that in the brain there are different synaptic models or synaptic models like GABA A, GABA B, you know, GABAergic synapses, and there are different types. even in this GABA A models, such as GABA A fast, GABA A slow. So you know that even though that it's not possible to manipulate in the synaptic level, but there are in your brain or in any brain, there are different synapses that can play in some information processing, you know, that can that modulate this rhythmic activity. So of course it led to modulate the information process in overall. So was it
Yes, yes, you answered my
okay?
questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was a nice talk. So wish you the best.
Thank you.
Hi, Nosratullah. So nice work. I have a few questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So one is like why are you calling these instantaneous? Because um, if the network somehow wants to change the uh, decay of synapses, then maybe it will want to have some neuromodulation there to close some different types of receptors and open some different, I mean, as you mentioned, GABA A, GABA B, right? And
Okay.
there,
Yeah.
those neuromodulation will be for long term, right? I mean, you cannot instantaneously switch them
Yeah.
off or on.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
So okay. Go ahead. I was
yeah, no,
interrupting.
yeah. So that's my question. I mean, why are you calling it instantaneous modulation?
So by instantaneous, it's not instantaneous modulation of in the synaptic level. It's
Okay.
instantaneous modulation of the LFP signal, and we know that for like uh, each cycle in your LFP signal, you kind of modulate the next period or even the second next period in your signal. So
Okay.
this phenomenon called something like history dependent phenomenon, right? So your network is not activity in a completely chaotic manner. It's going to keep its story and
I see. I see.
propagate this information through the activity. But your question was great. I'm absolutely positive about your comment. In terms of maybe in some synaptic learnings, you know, it's happening. This synaptic variations happening that can play with this instantaneous modulation, uh, but uh, uh, yeah, in overall, of course, you have like this syncopulation that's created from, I don't know, GABA A receptors or any other things. But there's still this very short variation, even in that certain population. So, for example, when you say GABA A receptors, the GABA A receptors are not specific to only one number. It's a like Gaussian length, you know, Gaussian range. so that those
do you mean that
they can you know, they can play with in that range, right? So this is still plausible in the network. That, yeah.
But is it possible to change for, suppose for even for GABA A, is it possible to change the decay of the of that function?
If it's possible, it's not, you cannot expect a lot of variation or a lot of change in your synaptic time constant.
Okay.
It's only a very narrow range, you know.
Okay. 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 And okay. Yeah, that's okay. This is fine. My other question is, so here, I mean, could you go to the slide where you could you go to fourth slide?
For this
Yeah.
one?
Yeah, I don't understand what I mean, how you are modeling this thing. I mean, the spike comes and then I suppose you are modeling the chemical synapse here, right?
Yeah. My focus was only on the chemical synapses.
But then why did you put then this capacitor here?
Which one?
Yeah, in this model, A neuron and then B neuron. I mean, you have put a capacitor here, or it's just I mean, just representing synapse.
Yeah, it's just an illustration. It's nothing that matters.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That. Yeah. And
thank you
okay.
for
And my last question is, I mean, how do you calculate the LFP? I mean, you have data. You have data for the VM of each of these neurons. Then from there, how do you calculate the LFP?
So I didn't measure any locality in the network, right? So I averaged all of the membrane voltages for each neurons. But of course, I separate the excitator neurons and inhibitor neurons. So I wanted to see if those populations behave in two different fashion or not. But it was quite the same as far as I know. And yeah,
okay, so
I only average all of the membrane voltages.
Okay, of like excitatory neurons, you averaged all the membrane.
And of course that I also recorded the spike activity, right? So in some simulations, let me. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, this plot comes from a spike activity, and this is a rate, a spiking rate activity.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah. So my questions are done.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
Any more questions? Any more questions? So seeing none.
I'm gonna write my email in case if you have any questions. And yeah, it was great to be among you guys.
So let's call it a day now. Thank you so much, Nosratullah, for this amazing presentation. Your work is really interesting.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.